Robocop! I never really used to get the 80s. It seemed like just a lot of cocaine and hair. But then I saw Robocop, and I saw something more through that hair. I saw an incredible film. We've all heard about its anti-corporate message and its ultra-violence. But let's dig deeper, put on our film school hats, and ask how the visual grammar, editing, and pacing function in Robocop. Now here's a list of things I like about Robocop! The visual match between Officer Lois and Murphy. From the first moment that we meet Officer Lois, she is a visual and symbolic match for Murphy. Their hair, their complexion, their build, and especially their attitude.
Why don't you drive?
They're equals. Murphy and Lois are two peas in a pod. Fast forward to the scene where Robocop starts questioning his past and Lois confronts him, we see this shot. Lois looks directly into the camera, directly into Robocop's visor, as she says,
"Murphy, it's you."
Because Murphy's looking directly at Lois, who is a visual match for him as she fills the frame, she functions as a mirror. She is the it to which Murphy is identifying. This is a key moment in Murphy's quest to regain his humanity, empathy, and identity. It's incredibly rare for a male action hero to have an equal female counterpart, especially because she's acting as a mirror for Murphy and not a fetish object. And does the fact that his mirror image is a woman mean Robocop is a trans icon? Not necessarily, but it's a reading opened up by the sequence of shots. But in any case, it's a miracle in itself to see a male action hero identifying with a female peer. The boardroom long shot. Special effects and cyberpunk are cool, but this seemingly simple, single, long take, which clocks in at just under a minute, ties the film's themes together in one dynamic shot. From Bob Morton's overly aggressive, overly loud corporate jockeying,
"Don't mess with Jones, man. He'll make sushi out of it."
to Dick Jones describing the friction between OCP and the cops,
Their union's been bitching ever since we took over. You know, the usual nonsense.
to the company's proposed plan for Delta City, which will bring those forces into violent collision. It's the kind of long take that you don't even notice because it's so seamless and natural. It crams 3 small scenes into one fluid shot. I count about 20 actors hitting complicated marks, delivering fast-paced corporate dialogue. And to top it off, we get a sense of the space in the monochromatic, high-tech boardroom. This shot is the beating heart of the film. Michael Bay would need 15 different edits, a bunch of fancy graphics, and as many as 3 different crop tops to tie together a scene like this. Corporations can't feel. One weird little tick that this movie has is the way that Robocop rattles off bizarrely insensitive, out-of-touch advice when confronted with innocent people, before he's come to terms with his identity. He tells these kids,
Stay out of trouble.
"Oh, great advice, robot bro. Way to vaguely threaten children." Or the way he interfaces with this woman.
Madam, you have suffered an emotional shock. I will notify a rape crisis center.
Not exactly the emotional support she needed in that scenario, but it's a perfect analog to the way that soulless corporations are simply incapable of mimicking true humanity. Compare that to how Robocop speaks when he actually has his mask off.
Murphy had a wife and son. What happened to them?
We see this today in even subtler ways, how fast food companies try to appropriate the language of weird Twitter. So next time you see a company tweet out a meme, I hope you read it out loud in Robocop's stiff, goofy voice. Try it at home with family and friends. Every frame a critique of capitalism? If there's one shot that perfectly portrays the in-story relationship between the average people of Detroit and the people who hold the power in Detroit, it's this one. And it's another example of how Verhoeven uses complicated film production techniques to get across the movie's complex themes in striking, simple-to-understand visuals. By using an attachment called a split-field diopter, the subjects on both the left and the right of frame remain in focus, even though Emil, on the right, is way closer to camera than the gas station attendant on the left. But it's not just a cool trick. It also allows Verhoeven to frame the attendant on the left as small and powerless. He's trapped behind what looks like a cage, imprisoned by his job, encased in machinery, an unwitting agent of capital. And on the right, Emil is an imposing figure that takes up more than half of the frame. He's a fascist black shirt, figuratively, and pretty much literally too, an agent of the same corporate culture that imprisons the gas station attendant. It only lasts a moment, but what a mind-blowing shot. Existential question time. What is a cop? I think the movie wants to capture what we hope cops are, what we want cops to be. Morally pure, selfless, heroic. And time again, the movie challenges that hope. We see ED-209, who represents the complete lack of humanity that cops are capable of. We see it in the collaboration between OCP executive Dick Jones and the criminals. Boddicker's gang basically acts like a private little SWAT team for Jones, executing his corporate agenda. And those same cops who acted as the voice of reason earlier in the movie,
well, I'll tell you what we should do. We should strike.
By the end of Act 2, they're lining up to blow Robocop away. Some of them voice their concerns.
Hey, wait a second! Get a cop, for God's sake!
But ultimately, they cannot escape their positions as enforcers in an unjust system. So what is a cop? Well, Robocop is a cop. ED-209 is a cop. Murphy is a cop. These good cops are cops. This asshole cop is a cop. The bad guy gang members are cops. Overall, the film complicates the idea that cops always equal good because it understands that cops are human, and humans are historically known to abuse power. What's in a name? There's a really interesting back and forth in this movie where we see Murphy's name, we hear Murphy's name,
Murphy, it's you.
but we also hear Robocop's name,
There's a new guy in town. His name's Robocop.
and see Robocop's name. So is he Murphy or is he Robocop? Well, he's both. There's a lot of doubles in this film. Murphy and Lois, Boddicker and Jones, Detroit and Delta City, ED-209 and Robocop. But ultimately what the movie is saying is these distinctions don't exist the way we want them to. And the final line in the movie,
Nice shooting, son. What's your name?
Murphy.
followed by the final Robocop title card, shoved that idea right in our face. Binary choices make us feel comfy, in control, and help us organize the universe. But in reality, it's hardly ever either or. Robocop is trapped between binaries. He is
Murphy.
but he's also Robocop. He exists in the space between human and machine, between employee of the evil corporation OCP and servant of the public good, constantly navigating his own identity. Just like you and me! But seriously, Lois is a badass. I would run slow motion across a field to be wrapped up in Lois's arms. It's rare that you get a well-written, female-identifying character in an action movie. And if this movie proves anything, it's that it's not that hard to write strong ladies, and anyone who's failed should be utterly ashamed. But really, she's incredibly smart, capable, funny. She's like the women I see in the real world and that I look up to. She also doesn't shed her femininity like many other 80s action heroes. For example, James Cameron's female leads, who are his personal, weird, fetishized ideal of a soldier mommy. Those characters communicate to the audience that feminine means weak. They imply that what a woman really needs to do is be more like a traditional masculine dude. But not Lois. When Lois sees Robocop, she knows right away that something is up with him, because she's intelligent and doesn't need a whole sequence where we see her put the clues together. She knows her partner. She follows her gut. Lois is all lady, all powerful. I mean, she delivers the final blow after her body is basically ripped apart because that's just what a fighter would do. Speaking of her body getting ripped apart, this scene is clearly setting up Lois to be the next Robocop. Murphy even promises her,
"They'll fix you. They fix everything."
a Robocop sequel with Lois and Murphy as buddy cop cyborgs would have been amazing. I love Lois. I love their friendship. I love it all. The happy ending only exists because the corporation allows it to. Here's a weird thing to ask yourself. Who has true agency in the final climactic scene of the movie? Dick Jones is a rich guy with a big gun. That's a lot of power. Robocop is a superhuman robot cop with a bigger gun. That's a lot of power. And yet, without his hostage, Jones is powerless. And as long as Directive 4 is in play, Robocop is powerless.
My program will not allow me to act against an officer of this company.
In this moment, the CEO of OCP is both the subject and object of power. He's the object, which is held by Jones in order to exert power, and he is the subject who is able to end the standoff simply by speaking. By the way, I had to look up what this character's name was because I didn't just want to call him the old man, but that is literally his name in the script because Robocop is a movie that's painfully aware of the patriarchy. Even at the movie's climax, it's not Robocop with his super machine body and big boy gun who holds the power. If the old man does not will it, it can't happen. Robocop kills the bad guy because in that moment, it serves the old man's agenda. Which is pretty terrifying since the old man has been running this whole show and made all the decisions that led to tons and tons of people getting killed over the past hour and 45 minutes of this narrative. The climactic moment of the movie is not Robocop shooting Jones. It's the old man saying,
Dick, you're fired!
But seriously, is Robocop a trans icon? I mean, if there's one person that loves finding different ways of reading films, it's me! So, is there a reading of Robocop as a trans icon? I think Verhoeven himself would probably say, hell yeah!
My wife picked up that script Robocop and read it. And she said, yeah, this is perhaps not, it's not Shakespeare, but it is a script with more layers than you think. As I started to work with the writers, I picked up so many layers and additional elements, and I got really inspired by what was already on the paper, by extending that, emphasizing it, pushing it.
And special thanks to Carmela Morel for her personal and academic insight in this section. Verhoeven's cinematic grammar attempts to produce a gaze that identifies with women instead of merely objectifying women. We do see characters within the narrative objectify women, but these acts of objectification are contextualized to us, the audience, as ironic, perverse, and absurd.
And you need lots of stimulation, Bobby.
Yes, I do.
We are watching these men watch TV, and we see them laugh harder than natural, as if they're performing that enjoyment. They cartoonishly perform cis-normative heterosexuality. The film satirizes gender roles over and over and over.
Go ahead, shake his hand.
Come here often.
Showing a violent hierarchy where men aggressively assert their masculinity on those around them, through violence and mocking laughter while holding big, phallic firearms. And amid this violent, comic, hyper-masculine hierarchy, we meet Murphy, a cop who begins the story desperately trying to perform cis-hetero male identity in order to convince his family that he's worthy of the titles husband and father.
And you don't want to disappoint him.
We see him spin his guns to impress his son, whose respect Murphy hopes to gain by acting like the famous tough guy action hero on TV. But this desperate attempt to claim masculinity is continually subverted by the narrative. As I mentioned earlier, there's a duality between Murphy and his female counterpart, Lois, where staring into her face seems to be the key to reacquiring his own identity. On top of that, at the end of Act 1, when Murphy gets murdered, he isn't just killed. He is savagely attacked by a pack of men who penetrate his body with their long guns. In fact, if we step back and take a look at the structure of Robocop, it's modeled after classic rape revenge movies like
I Spit on Your Grave,
where the female main character is violated,
Your ass is mine.
then exacts revenge on her attackers, one after another.
This woman will soon cut, chop, break, and burn 5 men beyond recognition.
In Murphy's quest to chase an external ideal and become the ultimate tough guy cop, he is transformed by external forces into a cyborg, a hyper-masculine ideal, a form that the authorities have decided he should inhabit.
Well, he signed the release forms when he joined the force. He's legally dead. We can do pretty much what we want to.
Instead of just becoming the real man he thought he wanted to become, he becomes more than a real man. His new body is a construction of society's view of what Murphy's ideal gender representation should be. He becomes exaggeratedly masculine, as if he's granted his wish, but as part of a devil's bargain where he didn't quite get what he expected. He's transformed into a bizarre shadow version of his desired self. In fact, he becomes comically and ironically masculine. The gun he fetishized earlier as a symbol of masculinity ends up replacing his genitals. His massive weapon is a perfect symbol of masculinity in a society that respects hyperviolence. As a super masculine machine, he's even got a second phallus, the computer jack that protrudes from his knuckles. And yet neither of these phalluses function sexually. They aren't just non-sexual, but violent instead of sexual. Robocop's lack of conventional genitals is even emphasized and played as a gag. Murphy's flashbacks also problematize the masculinity he hopes to achieve. These flashbacks show Murphy struggling with his new hyper-masculine identity, culminating in a visual metaphor where he passes through a female body. At the midpoint of the film, Murphy's goal changes from the desire to become this hyper-masculine figure that his son and society wants him to be, to answering the question, who am I? In the next beat on Robocop's journey of self-discovery, we see a world-class husband mug on the counter. But it's shattered, as if someone has violently rejected that title. And we never see who shattered it. And then we see this photograph from Halloween. Murphy's son is in costume, but the parents are not. Or are they? Murphy is performing the role of cis, male, hetero husband. That is his costume. And floating over his shoulder, a witch. A grotesque female form haunting him. Only after we see this Polaroid do we see the Halloween flashback for the first time. Murphy's wife appears to carve a pumpkin, except she's not carving it, she's tinkering with it, holding the carving tool like a screwdriver, as if she's constructing something. Constructing an identity out of a pumpkin. This foreshadows the way that Robocop tinkers with his own head at the beginning of Act 3, drilling into his own mind and coming to terms with the loss of his past married life. He's constructing his identity. In flashbacks, we see that Murphy's wife is clearly upset about something.
I really have to tell you something.
Something was wrong with their marriage. It's fairly vague in the film, but with the themes of gender and identity so clear elsewhere, it's a fair reading to suggest that maybe this fight was because of Murphy exploring their gender or identity. Maybe he wasn't being the man she wanted him to be. Before Murphy's death, Boddicker shouts at him,
Where's your partner? Where's your partner?
This can have two meanings. One, of course, being his cop partner, Lois. But the other is his romantic partner. She is no longer there. And later, when Murphy is on the operating table, we see an image of his wife waving goodbye. And this can also have two meanings. One being that Murphy is dying and she is saying goodbye, except this is a memory, so it's already happened in the past. Maybe this is his wife saying goodbye to him as their marriage is ending, because Murphy has failed at living up to her hetero male ideals for him, just as he failed to do so for their son earlier in the film. When the flashback of Murphy's wife is repeated at the midpoint, it's also clearly a different version of the memory, a different take. She conspicuously moves her arms in a way that's totally different from the other take, and her tone is softer.
I really have to tell you something.
Is this memory corrupted? Or is Murphy rewriting his memory as a version where his wife accepts him for who he is? Then, after cutting back to Robocop's visor, in a series of shots that recalls the scene where Lois confronted Robocop about his true identity, we see a memory we haven't seen before.
I love you.
And unlike the Halloween memory, which is prompted by a photograph, this memory is new to us, unprompted by sensory input. This female face fills the frame, mirroring Robocop's face. She says,
I love you.
Softly and sweetly, which is a pretty odd thing for a character to say in a Paul Verhoeven movie, known for being melodramatic, satirical, and cynical. If, as this series of shots suggest, she is Murphy's mirror, then symbolically Murphy is saying,
I love you.
to himself, perhaps accepting the female identity he's been desperately resisting up until this point in the narrative. We cut back to Robocop, this masculine robot, now shrouded in darkness. The next time we cut back to the wife, we, as Murphy, enter her mind and pass through her body. This female face, or head, or mind, is a passageway into something else, into an empty home, a blank slate, or a new beginning. Then, as Robocop continues through the home, a man's face on a computer screen asks,
Hey, have you thought it all over?
"Have you interrogated your own identity?" After passing through the compassionate female face, Robocop smashes this computerized, mechanized masculine face. Symbolism. So is Robocop simply the story of a cop whose body is destroyed and then rebuilt as a machine? Or is it the story of a person whose marriage was already falling apart? A person whose son has already questioned their masculinity? A person who attempts to become the epitome of masculinity and ends up embracing femininity? A person who navigates their own identity while society and corporate America violently force a hyper-masculine ideal on him? A person who, after being forced into a constructed metal body, rejects the product name and programming that's been forced on them? A person who repeatedly identifies with women.
It's you.
To wrap things up, Camilla Morel writes, cinema is very good at expressing universal ideas, which gender is not, since one's own gender is so internal, personal, dynamic, and not often entirely understandable or consistent. Where transgender viewers often feel the most seen is in body horror and sci-fi films about robots and aliens. Transness on film isn't lingering genital shots and staring sadly at one's own nude reflection. It's processes. It's the horror and abjectness of wrong body and the turmoil and excitement of transformation. It's the physical, mental, and emotional complexities and contradictions that can be plumbed much more effectively by both filmmakers and audience with symbolic and allegorical means instead of literal ones. And honestly, I wouldn't be so adamant about this reading if I hadn't just watched Verhoeven's Basic Instinct, which is a story of a woman who literally needs to hide her phallic object to avoid persecution because society doesn't approve of her personal relationships. You don't have to read Robocop this way, but if Donkey Kong can say,
Done right. Okay.
why not add Robocop to the mix? Thanks for watching, and a big thanks, as always, to my patrons. We've been able to release these videos a little more consistently lately, and that is entirely thanks to the support from all of you. If you'd like to support, head over to patreon.com/MaggieMayFish. Plus, I'm gonna have t-shirts soon, so keep an eye out for those. Save Martha, and until next time,
Stay out of trouble.